Good afternoon, everybody. This is Rich Sutter in the zone. I'm here with my friend Pete Coles, MVP, and we are here to discuss college basketball, check out the bracket, get into some of the different coaching changes that have been going on, and also just to discuss a little bit of our Mount Rushmore of coaches that we've talked about a little bit. I think we're ready to reveal that today, Pete, and I think it's going to be exciting for everybody to listen, maybe forge some discussion points around, and also to have some fun with. Also, the key bracket for today, the key look at the bracket today is obviously a really good graphic for us would be the rocket ship guys have used in the past, that you've covered those rocket ship launches,
Absolutely.
because that's exactly where my bracket went. And I basically have a Sonny Corleone in the toll booth bracket. It has quite a few bullet holes in it, but that's to be expected given the amount of tumult and given the amount of action that's been going on in this year's tournament. It's been absolutely exciting, been absolutely fascinating to watch. You layer that amongst the coaching changes that are happening right now, and you wind up with the most exciting time in the college basketball season right now. It's very exciting for the fans, exciting for the people that are within the game as well, the administrators in the game. We all follow it pretty closely. A lot of us refer to it as the coaching carousel, and we'll take some time to talk about that because in the last week since we've talked last, there's been a significant amount of change in that area, and that's something that we can talk about as well as in the bracket. But as usual, just to start off the day, we come out in the feed 'em fish bracket. Come out, and last week we talked about how Cinderella had been taken out of the picture. Cinderella had been absconded with. Well, I'm here to report today that that was premature. Our reporting, all of our diligence left us a little blindsided to the fact that Cinderella has emerged. She's escaped from the basement. She's possibly on her way to the ball in a chariot. And Cinderella is a tiger, an absolute tiger. We're talking about the Princeton Tigers. So we're going to take a little bit of time at the beginning of the show to talk about them and how fascinating a journey that team has had going through what they've gone through, and what does that do in the landscape of college basketball? How does that resonate in the landscape of college basketball? And so as we start Cinderella again, we're going to talk about them. So when we talk about them, we have to the Ivy League, because the league that Princeton resides in. The Ivy League is known much for basketball for their acts, a whole lot more than their basketball accomplishments. But I would say that they operate as the conference, and really, really interesting piece. They operate as the only conference that doesn't offer athletic scholarships to their players. Not exactly sure where they are in the NIL arrangement as well, but what you're looking at with this Princeton team is a group of gentlemen, by and large, who wind up at the university, whether they go on financial aid or whether they would be in the full pay student category. Most of these students are there in one way or another, having some financial consideration into the mix as well. So not only these gentlemen not on scholarship, but they're also having the most rigorous academic environments to operate within in the NCAA. So their move and the way that they're playing basketball right now is very, very exciting to watch, very, very special to watch. And as I said on my Twitter account the other day, I really, really see shades of Pete Carril in this team. And that's about the highest compliment that I think that I could pay to a coach, is that a Princeton coach is operating in the same vein, in the same direction as the great Pete Carril at Princeton. And these Tigers are playing selflessly. They share the ball beautifully. They space the floor as well as any team in the tournament right now. And when it comes right down to it, at the end of the year, what makes the difference between teams that advance and teams that don't is really shooting. It's really about making shots. And if you look at some of the statistics that went out from the early games, if you look at some of those upsets that occurred, Pete, I got to give it to you. You were right there on the Paladins over UVA. That was a huge, huge call. But what you saw in a lot of those power conferences is they didn't shoot the ball well in the game that they lost. Their shooting percentage was probably south of 34, 33%. And that was the part of it that made it difficult for them, because the other teams, if you look at FDU's shooting percentage, if you look at Princeton's shooting percentage from the outside, it's significantly better right now than some of the other teams in the tournament. And that's stylistic, and that plays to the different styles that both of those teams play. But generally, that doesn't hold up going through the tournament. And I would be remiss, but I think this is, as far as a Princeton team, at least in my lifetime, has occurred. This is as far as a Princeton team that I've ever seen go, and they're playing beautiful, beautiful basketball right now. The second piece of Feed 'em Fish is I want to mention, and may he rest in peace, the New York Knicks great captain Willis Reed passed away this week, and it was very saddening to me to see Willis Reed pass, because as a young man growing up in New York, I was a huge, huge Knicks fan, and I also like the Celtics very much as well. But I was a huge Knicks fan, and Willis Reed personified the Knicks in such a fashion, in such a way, that I was just probably, if I had, I don't wouldn't categorize him as the best NBA player of all time, but I will categorize him as possibly my favorite NBA player. And in this moment that we look at his passing, I just want to go back to 1969, because in my mind, this is the most seminal moment in sports history of what occurred in 1969 when the Knicks were playing against the Los Angeles Lakers for the world title. The Los Angeles Lakers had an amazing team with the great, great, dominant Wilt Chamberlain. Jerry West was on that team. A number of other teams great on that team. And the Knicks had made it out of the East past the Washington Bullets at the time, now known as the Wizards, with Earl Monroe, before Monroe joined the Knicks, and with Jack Marin. They're just really, really, Wes Unseld, the greatest outlet passer possibly of all time in the game. But I wanted to go back to the moment in Game 7 of that series where it was tied 3-3. And there was question in the media and great mystery. And I think Red Holtzman, as a coach, taught me something on that one. It's a great mystery surrounding whether Willis Reed would play or not that night. And as much as the media was hounding the coaches and trying to get any kind of beat that they could, the New York coaching staff did a great job of keeping that under wraps and keeping that tight. And so nobody going into Game 7 knew whether the great captain was going to be able to come out onto the floor. And the teams came out to warm up. And when they came out to warm up, Willis Reed was not with the Knicks. And so everybody in the Garden realized that his leg injury was significant. He was not going to be able to make it onto the floor that night. And the Knicks would have to go without him, with their backup center, who had been doing a great job for them and got them all the way to Game 7. So the Garden was completely dark in there, and all of a sudden a spotlight comes on the tunnel, and out comes Willis. It still chokes me up to this day to talk about it, because Willis Reed comes out, his left, I believe it was his left leg, about as heavily wrapped as you could possibly wrap somebody's leg. And he wrapped it up, and he came out onto the floor, and the absolute Garden just went deafening how loud it was in that place just to see the captain. He came out on the floor, but you could see he wasn't himself. His leg was bad, and he was a big, big man. And so he came out onto the floor, went up and down the floor a couple of times, but he went up and down the floor, caught the ball off the left side, off the left elbow. And Willis Reed, for a big man, had a beautiful, beautiful left-handed jump shot, a beautiful soft touch. Such a big man with such a beautiful soft touch from the foul line area. And he pulled up right on Wilt Chamberlain, and Chamberlain almost laid back a little bit and dared him to shoot it. And Reed pulled it, came back, and the left-hand stroke went up there. The ball went through nothing but net, and the Garden went absolutely crazy. At that moment, the horn sounded. Red Holtzman substituted for Wilt Chamberlain. Substituted for Willis Reed. He came out of the game and did not play another minute in that game. but his motivation and what he brought to the table at that moment was, to me, one of the greatest moments in sports history, the greatest moment in NBA history for me as a young man growing up. The Knicks wound up winning Game 7, winning the championship that year. And in 1969, the New York City area was full of miracles that year. The Miracle Mets and the Miracle Knicks came through and won championships. It was just amazing, amazing, exciting year to be a young man in New York City and growing up. But Willis Reed, to me, was one of the finest centers ever to play the game. He was a great player, a great gentleman, and he was also the captain of the Knicks when they had a U.S. to be a U.S. senator sitting on that team. And Red Holzman decided that Willis Reed would be captain over Bill Bradley, which was a great respect to the great Captain Willis Reed. So may he rest in peace. I loved him as a young man growing up. I loved him as a player. And as the captain, he showed up. And I think that's what's great about leadership. I think that's what's great about our leaders is that when it's time to show up and it's time to be there, Willis Reed was the greatest example of showing up that I think I could come up with in sports. So that being said, a little somber moment on the captain, but we're ready to move into, Pete, the much, much vaunted and heard about Mount Rushmore of coaching. This is how we're going to conclude our first clip here. Then we're going to jump right into the bracket. I think the level of games that are available today and tomorrow, I'm going to be glued to the television, and I can tell you the games today are going to be really, really exciting. There's going to be a lot of good basketball played today and tomorrow as you culminate and lead to the Elite Eight and the Final Four. Right now we're in the Sweet 16. That means we've taken all of the teams down from the 60 plus that were there to begin with through wins and losses. Now we've come through attrition, and now we have 16 teams that have survived. Princeton being one of the 16, which I think is the most exciting story in there, but there's a lot of really other good stories in there and some other really, really good feel-good stories in there that we want to talk about as well. But when we get to Mount Rushmore, we're going to have two Mount Rushmores because it's a little bit difficult to create a Mount Rushmore with people that are coaching now against a group of people that had stopped coaching many, many years ago. Now, this Mount Rushmore is only in my lifetime. I was born in 1960. So anybody who wants to flame at it, that some gentleman, Adolph Rupp, or somebody was a great coach back in the day at Kentucky, I'm sure he was. I just wasn't alive for it. So I'm going to take this in the context of pretty much when I was alive, people that I've seen coach. And again, this is my Mount Rushmore. My Mount Rushmore can be different than everybody's Mount Rushmore because what people see in a coach and what they think is good in a coach can be variable. And that's what makes this discussion point great. That's what makes the discussion points around the greatest of all time so much fun. When you talk about the NBA and people go back about LeBron and Michael and Larry and Magic and all the great names that are there, they're all great names. And you really, really have some great considerations going on there. But I want to get into the current one first. And so St. John's has recently hired what I consider to be the number one in our business, possibly. Maybe somebody in our business as coaches, we refer to him as the king. And I think Rick Pitino is somebody who would belong on the Mount Rushmore. And again, his latest move to St. John's, there's a lot of different people with a lot of different opinion about that. I want to just clear some of that up for you. St. John's is now headed to the Sweet 16 in a very, very few years. St. John's will now be a relevant Elite Eight or even better than that Final Four team within the next 3 or 4 years. This gentleman, Coach Pitino, is the best in the game. When he comes, you win. And that's what you pay our coaches for. Now, we can have some morality discussions in and around that, but I think to have morality discussions in and around that, we would need to include everybody in that because I think everybody's human, everybody's flawed. I think there are certainly levels, but I think as long as we're kind of all in the same business and everybody operates pretty much the same way, not everybody in the same vein, but in the same kind of way, I think you can't take Rick Pitino's accomplishments, look at them and say he doesn't belong on Mount Rushmore. That to me, I'm sure is going to be a sticky point with a lot of people. But his move from Iona to St. John's right now is a really, really good move for the people at St. John's. I worked down the street from St. John's as a young assistant coach when I was a teacher at Malloy High School. Queens Boulevard, Utopia Parkways, so that whole area of St. John's was within a stone's throw. So I maybe saw, on average 15 St. John's games a year that they were home, 10 or 12 or 15 St. John's games a year.
Yep.
They've been having a difficult time finding the right coach for all of that time. This is the right guy. This is the right guy for St. John's too, because Rick Pitino was born in Long Island, grew up in Oyster Bay, St. Dominic's High School. He has a great background in New York. The bottom line is the game is about winning. The coaching business is about winning, and his numbers and his credentials are off the charts. And so I think St. John's did a really, really good job in getting to their candidate, finding him and identifying him in short time, and then moving on him. If you look at the time frame that Notre Dame embarked on to find Micah Shrewsbury, and again, Coach Shrewsbury was in the NCAA tournament, so that might have had some bearing. But Coach Pitino was in the NCAA tournament as well. Coach Shrewsbury won a game, but Notre Dame search lasted a long, long time before they came up with Coach Shrewsbury. We can talk about that a little bit later, but I think St. John's moved quickly, moved on the right guy, and I think they're headed for good things in the future. I think their recruiting is going to get blown off the charts because people are interested in trying to get to that next level NBA. And there's probably one or two or three guys in our business that can be next level coaches. And Rick Pitino is number one of all those guys. So moving on, I want to go to Coach Self. I hope he's feeling better. He missed the NCAA tournament this year. I really hope he's feeling better and doing well. I think he's a tremendous coach. My good friend Norm Roberts works for him, and I think they have a great staff, good connection. I believe Freddie Cordobaum, a New York guy, is also on that staff as well. But Bill Self, over time, has national championships, Final Four. He's just a coach's coach. When you watch his team, you look at his team makes complete sense the entire time that they're out on the floor. Now, as a guy who's been in the business for 40 years, I do turn on my television from time to time, look at coaches who make an awful lot of money, get paid an awful lot of, have a lot of prestige and money for the job. And I look at the television and I sit there and I go, what are you doing? This is coaching 101 and you're missing the boat here. I don't think you've ever seen that with a Bill Self team. They're ultra prepared. Their recruiting is fabulous. They get great players to attend Kansas. And that's one of the most vaunted programs in all of the country for NCAA basketball, going back to Adolph Rupp, going back to all the great coaches they've had there, Coach Roy Williams, who eventually went to North Carolina. But Kansas is one of the premier programs in there. And I don't know that you find a better coach on the sidelines in the game right then other than Bill Self. So I want to give him the second head. And as we talked about it before, I said, how many heads do we have on the mountain? Because you can always have endless amount of heads on the mountain and talk about that in great detail and context. But I've chosen 5. I'm going to put 5 heads on each mountain. So now we go to number 3. His team is still playing. If you watch him on the sidelines, the intensity oozes out of his pores. His teams are so well prepared, and I'll tell you why they're so well prepared. Because before we got all of this technology that we have right now,
yep,
Tom Izzo was on the leading forefront of the technology push. And what he would do is have a couple of his managers whose only job was to film every single college basketball game they could find anywhere that year. Over the course of the year, they would accumulate a library of tapes on everybody in the NCAA. That crew would get in a van and move to the site of the NCAA tournament and set up a hotel room. And in the hotel room is all their sound technical editing equipment. And they'll take all of the tapes that they have on all the opponents in the bracket and they'll start to splice them and they'll break them up into clips. And they'll take your 10 most run plays that you run as a team and they'll cut them up into clips so they can just bring the team in for a quick 15-minute film session, look at all the clips of everything that you just ran, and then go out on the floor and walk through it again. So that by the time you come to play against Coach Izzo, his players know your plays better than your players do. And that's the key to his success over the years, is his preparation is so intrinsic. It's so detailed. And he's just the kind of guy that when you see young men running up and hugging and embracing their coaches, You see that in the moment of celebration, obviously, but it goes beyond that because so many of these coaches serve as role models and father figures for many of these young men. And I don't know that too many people over the course of time, and again, you can't go this business for all of those years without having some little bit of rub here, a little bit of rub there. But I think Tom Izzo has done an amazing job. He's put Michigan State on the map. The Spartans are one of the elite teams in college basketball, and predominantly because of Mr. Tom Izzo, Coach Tom Izzo. I think he's terrific. Moving on to number 4, I like this gentleman. I want to see his team succeed this year, so they kind of take the bump off of some of the coaches. If you haven't won a national championship, and I don't think people understand how hard it is to win a national championship, but that seems to be the standard for many, many of the big coaches. Have you been able to get over the top and win the national championship? The next guy I have on my Mount Rushmore hasn't gotten to the top of the mountain, hasn't won it, but his standard of success, and we talked about it last week, his standard of success over the last years has been absolutely staggering, absolutely phenomenal. They have lost in their league over the last 10 years, maybe in the vicinity of 20 league games. 10 of those games have been to St. Mary's or to BYU. And the guy we're talking about right here is Mark Few from Gonzaga. He is an amazing coach. He has run an amazing program. The NBA is now littered with some of his players up on the other levels, first round draft picks, and just an amazing, amazing array of talent that they've had at Gonzaga. But it's really the Mark Few way that I think separates them in that West Coast because he seems to have a great grasp on exactly what their program looks like year in and year out. It doesn't change a lot. There's not a lot of differentiation. They're going to come at you. They're going to bring it to you. And if you can stop it, then you can stop it. If you can't, and most people can't and struggle with it, they're going to have success and they're going to be really good. And they're still alive in the tournament. I think they have a good chance to advance. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But the last name on Mount Rushmore, the Houston Cougars, Kelvin Sampson. And I think he's done an amazing job with his Houston team. And he's done an amazing job in other places that he's been. But this Houston team, as I talked about before, really has my admiration for the amount of intensity that they bring to the defensive end of the floor. They play the game, to me, the right way because both of their sides of the floor are played with intensity. Today, it's very easy to get players to play the offensive side of the ball with intensity. That's no issue at all. But when it comes to the defensive side of the ball, to get real intensity, to get real buy-in from the 5 spokes on the wheel that you have out there, that's more difficult than it's ever been in the game. And that's one of the things that I think keeps Coach Sampson as so relevant, such a great coach, and again, a player's coach. When you see the players come to the sidelines, they're hugging Coach Sampson. They're embracing Coach Sampson in a way that you see very, very rarely with some coaches because he has built his relationships and built his culture upon his players and his system. And that's what keeps him resonating with the players because they love his intensity. They love the fact that he's dialed up every game. And I think that this group really, really has bought in because if you looked at Baylor a couple of years ago, they were very successful and they played amazing defense with great athletes that could cover the floor. Going back to the caveat that I have about Houston is I don't know that they shoot the ball well enough from the outside. I don't know that they can't struggle. But if they get you into that crocodile game where they grab you, pull you under, and start thrashing, you're going to be in trouble. If you get that game in the 50s and the 60s, that's going to favor Houston every single time. So whoever's up against them next, I believe it's the Miami Hurricanes. That's going to be a good test to see who can get out offensively and who can get out defensively because they're kind of 2 different teams that are going at each other. But I'm going to put Coach Sampson on the top of that mountain because I really love what he's been doing. And I think what he's doing right now requires buy-in, and I think that's not that easy to have these days. So I really do like Coach Sampson. So let's move over to the former coaches side of Mount Rushmore. We can have them both looking right at each other. And so you have to start out there with Mike Krzyzewski, I believe, Coach K. I've had the pleasure of meeting him and dealing with him on a number of different occasions. And I had the opportunity to work at Duke's basketball camp when I was a young coach. Learned an awful lot about defense from that group, especially his former assistant coach, Pete Gaudette, who was a real great X's and O man. But Coach Krzyzewski is obviously the class. What he built in Durham was amazing. And this is something that I wanted to talk about as well, because we're talking about coaching carousel and we're talking about ADs being reluctant to bring up players, coaches that are down on that lower level, to bring up that player they look at and say, this guy could be a superstar, but my boosters aren't going to like him. And Tobin Anderson kind of blew his way through that barricade a little bit by taking FDU into the tournament, and now he's wound up with a different job. But I think the same thing is true because Coach Krzyzewski came to Duke from Army. He had great teams at Army. People had loved the way he had coached them there, and his move from Army to Duke was a huge jump, and one that wouldn't really occur today unless the coach at Army wins the national title or goes deep into the NCAA tournament. And so that's the part of it that saddens me a little bit. I think it would behoove the game to get back into a more seniority driven situation. We talked about Coach Anderson. I love Coach Anderson. He's great. Tobin Anderson was on the Division III level, coached on the Division II level, and coached on the Division I level. And when you have gentlemen who are out there and have not ever called a timeout, have not ever planned a practice, have not ever gone through and met with a group of boosters to try and raise money, before you go into that and never having been a head coach before, I don't think it's impossible. I don't think it's not doable, but I do think that the odds increase and they go against that coach a little bit for a coach who hasn't done that. With Coach Anderson, you see a coach who's gone up ranks 1, 2, and 3 in step sequence, and it's worked out, and his team look like it, you know. So I'd like to see some more of that happen. But Coach K is my guy up on the top of Mount Rushmore. Another gentleman I had the pleasure to meet, and I thought this guy probably exemplified and meant a lot to college basketball in terms of his visual, in terms of who he was, obviously, and that's, of course, Coach Wooden out at UCLA. I was alive for a little bit of his time. The actual first college basketball game that I ever watched, and it was really difficult for me to watch because I was about 8 or 9 years old, and I was in my uncle's and aunt's house down in Manhattan, and it was a West Coast game, and so it went on real late, and I was just dying and trying to stay awake and trying to stay awake. So I remember seeing the first couple of minutes of the game and then falling off to sleep. But that was against Houston, against UCLA, with then Lou Alcindor, who became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. But I mean, you talk about the success Coach Wooden had at UCLA, the great teams that he had. They were the absolute standard when I was growing up. That changed, and the mantle shifted to Coach Knight and Coach Krzyzewski. But I think John Wooden, I mean, how could you not? So that brings us to Coach Knight, who's in the third position there. I think Coach Knight could win a national championship with a team that most other people couldn't get in the Sweet 16 with. Coach Knight can win a championship with a team that most people couldn't get to the round of 32. And that's the greatness of that man. He was an absolute great basketball coach. His players played at a very high level for him. But Indiana never went to the recruiting practices that a lot of the other schools went to. And a lot of people in our business know exactly what that means. But if you played it straight, do you bell curve that a little bit? And I think it's important to note that I think Coach Knight, went through most of his time without NCAA violations. I know there were some different things that happened with him in practice and some other places, but I think people misunderstand sometimes about what I refer to as baseline intensity and what's required of coaches when they get between that baseline and the level of intensity that's required for the job in order to do the job well. I think that the hard part is when it comes to turning it off when you come off the sideline. And that's the difficult part, I think, for a lot of coaches, is just like with players. The players are in there and they're performing and they're in front of crowds and it's a ramped up environment and you're full of adrenaline. And then all of a sudden the game ends and now you have to stop. And so I think that's something I just have great respect for Coach Knight. Again, I did get to meet him, and and we competed against his teams, and it was just kind of awe-inspiring to be in Bloomington and to see the sea of red and all that stuff. But I think that without question, he belongs on Mount Rushmore because most guys couldn't win the national championship as he did on a number of occasions with the talent level that he had. And you also have to go back to his team that was a very, very important team for me when I was growing up as a young man. I want to say it was in the 75, 76 area where they went undefeated for the entire year. The last team that's done that, where they went way through the season. And that's really, really an unbelievable accomplishment. Nobody's done it. And so when you look at things and you say, nobody's done it, that's special to me. If you can say that we've done something that nobody else has ever done, I think that that's really special. And so I think when you get to that point, you know, it's really it's just it's coaching, and that's the part of it that people kind of fail to understand. I think these days is because you can sit in your living room or you can sit in your stands and you can say, well, I would do this and I would do that. And that's the great part about our game is that people can actually invest themselves into the game and become part of the game. I think if you go to AAU events, sometimes you'll see some parents that are kind of over the line there and they're past the stroke of midnight on it. But for the most part, you know, it's a way of being invested into the game. But as a coach, that kind of creates a lonely spot for you because you're the only guy up there that really has to make the call. Everybody can have an opinion about it, but you're the one who has to look those young men in the face with 3 seconds left on the clock when you're down by 2 points and you've got to have something that works. And that's where the great coaches operate. And so, again, I criticize a lot of these young coaches because I'm turning on my television and we're down in 3-2-1 time and we don't even get a shot off. We're down at 3-2-1 time and we roll the ball off our leg. We're down at 3-2-1 time with the buzzer just about to sound, the game on the line. And I'm wondering, what play did you just run? What was the design on that in order to get there? And I think that's what's missing with some of these young coaches. And so what happens is if you elevate a lot of these young coaches to the point of being up in these power conferences, you're still going to have the Mount Rushmore coaches of Pitino, Self, Izzo, and Few. And that's just going to create more of an advantage for them. They have great programs, they have great players, but now they're the guys with the coaching knowledge. And the knowledge between them and the gentleman who used to sit on the other bench for them wasn't significant, but it's growing and it's becoming significant. And I think you're going to see that as we come down into some of these coaching changes that are happening right now. You have gentlemen who've been in the job for 2 years looking up, taking another job, and they haven't really, really done great in the job that they have. So when we go to, you know, all through it, you know, we have great coaches. We have Dean Smith, you know, somebody you would have to consider as one of the greats of all times. You have Coach Krzyzewski, you have Bob Knight, of course John Wooden, you know. But when you get into that, you know, later category, there's just two guys that I really want to mention because these gentlemen played it straight. Didn't have guarantee games, didn't have NIL or previous NIL arrangements, which we heard about on the wiretapping. And they played it straight, and on any given night, their teams could beat anybody. And the people from UMass will remember this name is John Chaney, the former Temple coach,
Sure.
who I had the pleasure to meet on a number of occasions, who was just a special American human being. He was just an icon and just a great, great gentleman. Not a big fan of Coach Calipari's, I know, but I think that, you know, over the course of his career, what he did, where he did it, and how he did it is significant. And in that same vein, I want to talk about my all-time favorite coach, Pete Carril, because Pete Carril was an absolute mastermind. And like the who's the Sicilian cook in the family, she's the great chef in the family. She never gives up the full recipe. She never gives up her full sauce recipe because she's got the special sauce. And if she gives it up to everybody else, then everybody else has the special sauce. So what was going on with Pete Carril inside of his brain, inside of his coaching career, inside of all of that greatness, some of it went with him because there's nobody around that knows exactly all of the intricacies of that offense and the way that it ran and what it was built on and the premises of that. And you consider as a coach, like I tried a few times, and I said to my assistant coaches, hey guys, we're coming in this year and we're running Princeton offense. And they were like, okay, what does that mean? And I said, I don't know. But look at the way they move, look at the way they play. Let's try and figure it out because it's just so beautiful to watch. So I wanted to mention Coach Kirill up there as well. I think those names are pretty complete list of names. But again, anybody who has an opinion about it, please jump in with us, let us know, because we're open to discussion. And that's what I think is important. So, Pete, I want to get into the bracket. I want to get into the bracket.
All right.
I did put up a full disclaimer last week that I wasn't very, very good at this. Okay? 22 and 10 were my numbers. We picked 32 games. 22 of them I picked correctly. 10 of them I picked incorrectly. The Virginia game with Furman, I went out the door. Princeton beating Arizona, I would have never picked that in 25, 30, 40 years. Purdue, them going out as early in the tournament as they did, I would not have predicted that as well. And I was a big fan of Memphis during the tournament, and they got bounced down pretty good as well. So we're down to the Sweet 16.
So you want to start in the East?
I'll start anywhere you want.
All right, let's start in the East. So the games coming up today, the 23rd, when we're taping this, are Florida Atlantic and Tennessee.
And a graduate of Bobby Knight disciple. His teams play tremendous, tremendous defense, but you're also going to possibly see somewhere in the upwards of 30 three-point balls go in the air tonight. They're going to stretch the floor like crazy. Tennessee, Rick Barnes, I talked about their team. They went through a really, really rigorous SEC schedule. And when I saw them in the middle of the year, they had just knocked off Alabama being the number one team in the country. And so their football team and their basketball team knocked off Alabama. They charged the football field. They came out onto the court for this. But then I thought they kind of lost their rhythm a little bit and had to kind of recalibrate as they went. I think having Rick Barnes as your coach, that's why he gets paid the money that he does. That's why he's respected as much as he is, because he did recalibrate with them and he did get back to the basics. And what does recalibration mean? Recalibration means in this business, the hardest thing to do is win. The hardest thing to do is win over a sustained period. It's really, really difficult to lose over a sustained period, but you have your team much more focused when they've lost over a sustained period than when they've won over a sustained period. It's human nature is the way that I kind of strike it out, is that as you've had success, you start to kind of lower your guards. You're not as hungry as you once were. And that's where I think that some of this comes into play. But I think Coach Barnes really took them back. I would say they went to a couple of practices in February, which are, as you go through the year, you wear your players down a little bit too, because of the physical nature of it. And in Tennessee, you're on the plane one time, you're traveling to this city, you're traveling to that city, you're in a hotel room. You can wake up and not even know what city you're in sometimes. So it can be very, very difficult on the team as well. But what recalibration means is, as you get to January and February, your practices usually aren't as rigorous as they are in October and November. October and November, you're getting ready for the season. You're going 2.5 hours. The practices are rigorous. Everybody's drinking water. Everybody's running for the sidelines. Everybody wants to take a rest. As you get into January and February and start to really gear yourself towards game preparation and having 3 games in a week and not being able to physically take your team to that level, what happens, though, is when you have to recalibrate, it means in February, you have to take your team to that level. In January, you take your team to that level. I'll give you an example. A number of years ago, all of John Calipari's Kentucky players were getting ready to go home for Kentucky for Thanksgiving, leaving Kentucky to go home for Thanksgiving. And everybody's got their stuff packed. There's great excitement. They had won a game before, 2 days before, by over 20 points. But coach didn't like the way they played, didn't feel like they were hungry, and didn't feel like they were recalibrated. What happened was he made the call and said, tell your families you're not going home for Thanksgiving.
Wow.
Everybody picked up the phone, said, you're not going home for Thanksgiving. And they recalibrated with 4 or 5 practices during that time from people that I know that are in there, that they were November practices. They were October practices. And they were going after it at that time and just going wild. And then they wound up coming out winning like 15 or 16 straight games after that because they were very, very talented. But coach was going through it with them. We're talented, but we're feeling our success right now. And that's something that as a coach is where you're kind of in a precarious spot. And so Rick Barnes really, really recalibrated this team, really got this team to move in the right direction. And they're very good. They're terrific. They have length. They have athleticism. They play physical. And their offensive skill set isn't as bad as it shows at different times. They have a consistency issue on the offensive side of the ball more than anything. They're very, very talented. They have the ability to make it work, but they have highs and lows, and most basketball teams go through that. But their team's a little bit more prone to that high and low than some of the other teams are, I think. And I think that's a great matchup there. So who do you got next on the other side?
All right, let's move over.
No. We're still in the East, right?
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
Who's
Let
the
me go back to the East. And the other game on the East side is Kansas, K-State, and Michigan State.
Okay, that's to me one of the best games of the day. That is going to be a basketball battle. That is going to be a great game. You have Coach Izzo, who's on our Mount Rushmore, but you also have Coach Tang from K-State, who he's what I refer to as a personality coach. He has a personality that just is vibrating in it, and his team is resonating with him. And right now, the fact of the matter is that, yeah, he's a vibrational coach. Yeah, he's an emotional coach. But the fact of the matter is they might have the best talent in all of the tournament. And one player that I wanted to talk about, because this is a great feel-good story, is Keontae Johnson, who plays for K-State. And this is a story that I'm sure people have heard of because it's a little bit difficult to make the connection because he was at a different school and he had a heart arrhythmic episode which caused him to collapse on the floor during a basketball game or during practice. I don't remember which it was. I'm pretty sure it was practice. And he was having difficulty making it back, getting doctors to clear him. Once the medical teams get involved, they want to obviously be sure before they clear somebody for that type of strenuous activity. But he had difficulty finding a place and wound up transferring to K-State, finally getting some doctors that can come around and medicate and work with him on his ailment. But he might be the best player in the entire NCAA tournament right now. And he was a gentleman that was on the floor several years ago, and people were standing in the stands and standing around, not sure if he was actually going to make it. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing that he's up and healthy and back with us. But that young man might be the absolute best player in the entire tournament, and that's somebody to keep a watch at. I think K-State's going to give Michigan State all that they can handle in this game.
Yeah, that should be a fun side on the east side. Now let's move over to move over to the west. The other two games on the 23rd, Arkansas and UConn.
I really like UConn's team, but Arkansas, with everybody that's been in front of them, they have locked down and played tremendous defense. They make it very, very difficult for you to get into the flow of your offense. And what I mean by that is when you're talking about a 30-second clock that exists in college ball, it's a shot clock. The minute you take the ball out of bounds, on the other side, you have 30 seconds to get your shot off. Otherwise, it's a turnover violation, which goes back to the other team. So you have 30 seconds to get it done. Arkansas's main focus is to eat 15 of your 30 seconds before you even get into your offense. Their whole focus is to make your first pass, second pass difficult, and to play great half-court defense. And Coach Musselman has done an amazing job. I'm not sure if you saw him go into the crowd the other day and get his home crowd pumped up. He wound up pulling his shirt off and going crazy in the crowd with his shirt pulled off and everything like that. So I think he's really feeling the moment, and he's really got his team placed in the right direction. But any of the teams that came out of the top of the Southeast Conference, Arkansas, Alabama, those teams are wildly athletic and have a lot more athletic ability than some of the other teams in the tournament. It's a stylistic issue, really. If you look at the Big Ten, the Big Ten's known for their physical play. And as you see, sometimes that works in the NCAA tournament, sometimes it doesn't. But when you have a team in a tournament that has athleticism and has been in a conference tournament situation, been in league play situation where every single game is a high value, maximum level game, you can come out of the NCAA tournament and you play other teams. It looks like you're playing against nobody because you've been through what you've been through. And so I think Arkansas is kind of feeling that moment right now. And I would, they're dangerous because they're playing, as you say, they're playing with house money.
But on the other hand, UConn's offense has been on fire.
UConn's offense is, so we go back a little bit. One of my favorite coaches of all time on the high school level is Bob Hurley Sr. I think he's tremendous. I think he's one of the great coaches. I got to work for one of the great coaches, Jack Curran, at Archbishop Malloy. And then you would probably, if you had a high school Mount Rushmore, those three names, Morgan Wooten, Jack Curran, Morgan Wooten of DeMatha, Jack Curran of Archbishop Malloy, and Coach Hurley of St. Anthony's are probably the three names that come to mind right away as you're putting something like that together. And so both Bobby Hurley and Danny Hurley grew up in that whole basketball family and grew up with the most iconic high school coach in New Jersey state history and one of the most iconic in the entire country. There's been numerous jobs that they were talking about that he could walk in and take and do well with in the college level. And I'm in agreement with that because I think Coach Hurley's amazing. So when I look at both of the young boys coaching now, I see the dad really prevalent in there. I see his influence very heavily in there. And there probably haven't been 5 guys that have walked the sidelines that are tougher than Bob Hurley Sr. He's a tough guy. He walks around he was a probation officer. He walks around St. Anthony's in Jersey City like he is the Don. And it's well deserved and well earned because he has that type of cachet and reputation. But to watch the boys coach now, it's interesting because they possess some of that same intensity that they did as players, and it's just interesting to watch them stylistically. The way that I see that dad is intertwined in some of the stuff they're doing. Going back to UConn, I talked about Aaron Jackson. I think he's tremendous. The big man, Donovan Clingan, is an NBA lottery pick when he gets out, I think, as is the other big man. I think he's maybe not a lottery pick, but he's going to be a first-round draft pick as well. So I think they have a front line that's tremendous. Their guard play is very good. I think it's going to be a matter with them because I've watched them at different times during the year. I think their emotional quotient is going to be really important here. I think how well they can handle themselves emotionally is really going to play into it. They beat a very good St. Mary's team. They beat a very good St. Mary's team.
Well, the storyline I saw that too. I saw on WFSB reported last night that UConn came into Las Vegas, went into their hotel, and then within one day switched hotels. And had a great practice yesterday inside the dome out there in Las Vegas.
I would imagine if you were going to pick regions, Las Vegas might be the most difficult one to keep your team focused in. There's just so much distraction going on and so much different life going on out there, the gambling life and all that different stuff. I think that'd be a tough place to do it. I was in New Orleans when North Carolina beat Michigan for the national title, and being on Bourbon Street in New Orleans in that environment, for the Final Four, it's not easy to keep your guys focused and to keep them really prepared for the game. But you're going into a situation there. Go ahead, Pete.
No, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to go on to the last game, but you got a final thought on this one.
Yeah, I think UConn, been playing very well. I think they might prevail. I think it's going to be a great game now because I think Arkansas, their league play just prepares them so well And their players are playing with a tremendous amount of confidence right now. They're playing extremely confidently, and that helps that tournament ton.
Okay, number 3, Gonzaga versus number 2, UCLA.
So if you think Michigan State and K-State is going to be a great game on one side, this on the other side is a marquee matchup game. Unbelievable. 2 great coaches, Mark Few, Mick Cronin. Mick Cronin has put UCLA back in UCLA standards, because if UCLA doesn't make the Final Four, they think they've had a bad year. And so Mick Cronin has done a great, great job of re-elevating them to those standards. Their recruiting is tremendous. And the inside player they have, Vasquez, is so dimensional. There's so many things he can do that he just can hurt you in so many different ways. You're watching him, and then the other guys hurt you too. It's just he's such he's a presence out on the floor that he kind of brings energy to him, and it's very, very interesting to watch him out there with his teammates, because he might not have the great talent that all those other players have, but he has size, he has grit, and he has fantastic hands. He catches everything, and when he's around the basket, he puts the ball in the basket and scores well. So I really, really don't know Gonzaga, UCLA. Picking that one's like, oh my God, you could flip a coin almost, but it's going to be a great game. I really think into this tournament, the game I want to miss.
All right, let's go to the games on the 24th now. We'll start with Houston and Miami, Florida.
Okay, so Houston Cougars are the best defensive team in the entire tournament. I think Miami Hurricanes might be one of the best offensive teams in the tournament. Miami caught a little bit of a break with their big man Norchard Armir being healthy. He sprained his ankle in the ACC tournament. They kept him out for a couple of days of practice. He healed up pretty good, and he moved pretty well the other night when I saw him when they beat Indiana. But I think this Miami team, I said this from the very, very beginning, they played in the Elite Eight, and 2 teams that I thought were really going to resonate in this tournament are Kansas State and Miami, and I think they're both really, really good teams. I think this Miami team, believe it or not, is going to handle Houston outright. I think they're going to beat Houston today, and I don't think the people in Las Vegas probably think that, but I think Miami's playing at a really, really high level right now. Jim Larrañaga from the Bronx, good friend, and a great, great coach in his own right. Probably I believe he's a Hall of Fame nominee this year for the Naismith Hall of Fame, so obviously a great credential for Coach Larrañaga. I really like the way his team is playing. I said this before. I think Wong and Pack are the best in the country, and Isaiah Wong absolutely put on a show the other day against Indiana. I think if I was Houston, I'd be very, very cautious about this game, and I'd really, really want to have spent time on what we refer to in the coaching business as help and recover, meaning you want to get into your position and be in really good help position to help on a driver, but that also means you just left your man open and you need to recover to him. And if they don't recover well in this game, Miami's going to blow them out, because Miami runs a lot of high ball screen action, and Miami can get at the rim if you don't stop that action. Once you stop that action, it leads to a cataclysmic series of other events, which leads them up to get really, really good shots. If you watch Jim Larrañaga's teams over the years, you'll see their shot selection is terrific. And that's one of the things in the way you're going to separate from 16 to 8 to 4 is making shots and selecting the right shots to take. Those 2 things will be hugely critical in this whole thing as we move forward. But I think Miami right now can spread the floor, can really, really shoot the ball, and they're doing a terrific job here coming down the stretch. I think they're hot. They lost to Duke in the NCAA, in the ACC semifinals, but I thought they played real well during the year, and I think they're really something to contend with.
Okay, so the other game in the Midwest bracket is Xavier and Texas.
Sean Miller was at Arizona for many, many years and had a little bit of a problem with some of the wiretapping issues and some different stuff like that. Left Arizona, and now he's back at Xavier, and he has this team. I watched this team last year that was not coached by Coach Miller, because this is his first year at the helm. The team was coached by an interim coach last year, and they wound up going all the way to the NIT championship and doing a really, really good job getting in the NIT championship. They're very, very talented. They have some injuries right now, but I think the injuries have been almost what we refer to in this business as addition by subtraction, because they seem to have lost a player or two to injury, but they're playing better for some strange reason. Right now, they're clicking and they're playing great basketball. And they're another team that a huge advantage for some of these teams in the tournament when you have big men who can step away from the basket and shoot the basketball. And Xavier has the best shooting big men in the tournament, and they're able to step away from the floor and really shoot the basketball, step away from the rim, space the floor, and shoot the basketball. That creates driving lanes for their guards. That creates open shots for their other wingmen as well. So the fact that their big men can step out and shoot the three and really stretch your defense, that's a problem. That's a real problem. And I think coming into it, Texas has had a great year. I don't know why they haven't lifted the interim tag on the coach yet. I'm assuming that they're looking at some of the really, really big names, but I don't know.
Sounds like got a fire alarm going off down there.
It seems like we have some kind of alarm. I don't know if you're going to be able to edit that
out. We'll just keep going.
Yeah, why not? Stay focused, Pete. We stay focused on In the Zone. So if I have to leave the room, obviously I'll leave the room, but I think we're going to probably get this under control.
Sounds like they silenced the alarm. Keep going.
Yeah, let's roll. So Texas Xavier is going to be a great game. I wouldn't pick one there, but I think I'd favor Texas there. Their size inside is going to be tough for them to handle.
And it looks like they had a little bit of an easier time coming through the first couple of games, too.
Yeah, their bracket has been pretty favorable, but they're very, very good. They have Marcus Carr, who transferred in from Minnesota. He was a guard from Minnesota for many, many years. He's one of the better guards in the – I thought the young man from SMU transferred over to Memphis. Price is one of the best lead guards in there, but I think also you have some of this guard play, and it's been really, really fantastic. So I think that you have to do that in it as well. So I think they've done very, very well. We'll see. That's what makes it interesting.
All right, and let's look at the final group in the South in Louisville. Alabama and SD, San Diego State University.
San Diego State's another good success story. I think what happens when you pick a bracket also is you tend to be familiarized with some of the teams to a greater extent than you're familiarized with the other groups. Now, for myself, in my own personal life, what I like to do is I like to have espresso at 7 o'clock p.m. And when I take my espresso, maybe throw a little bit of Sambuca in on the side there, that keeps me up. And that keeps me up late at night. So 1 o'clock is kind of where I'm at. So West Coast games for me are games that I see much more than probably other people do, because who wants to start watching a basketball game at 11 p.m. except me? And so I'm sure there's some other people out there, but they're not time zoned probably the way that I am. And so watching San Diego State over the years and over this year, they have really, really come into their own on both sides of the basketball. They're playing hard offensively, playing great defense, and I think that they're one of the surprise stories of this tournament. Now, again, getting mixed up against who they got mixed up against, that's going to be a rough out every single time, but again, they're playing with house money. I like San Diego State in that game personally.
And the final game of this Sweet 16? Or sorry, Elite 8 is Creighton and Princeton.
Creighton and Princeton. If there was a team that Princeton could get and handle here and go to the Elite 8, I would say of all that are on this paper right here, Creighton's the best matchup they could have possibly gotten. I say that with the caveat that Creighton's very, very good. They're extremely well coached by Coach McDermott. But I think they did struggle at different points of the year, and they struggle a little bit with their consistencies. If they don't shoot well, they struggle. If they don't play well from the front, like when they get a lead, they're a very, very strong team. When they get behind, they have some difficulties. So Princeton's going to take the clock on them. Princeton's going to take the clock and say, okay, we're going to slow the game down. We're going to make you play defense for 20 seconds, 25 seconds, and then we're going to wind up with a good shot anyway. And that's very, very frustrating to teams. But right now, what I learned along the way in basketball also is athleticism is really, really important in what we do, but intelligence is more important than athleticism. And I think you're seeing that with Princeton right now, is that they're probably the least athletic team in the 16 teams that are left there. But I doubt you're going to see a team that plays with a higher intellectual capacity than this group does right now as well. And that's what's keeping them alive. And so as you go up against it, Creighton's very physical, very big. They have some inside people that are terrific. And Princeton doesn't have those things. But Princeton's going to be able to bring those big guys out on the floor. And if they don't cover out on the perimeter, then they're going to hit threes on them, and it's going to make it an interesting game. And so that's going to be the matchup. I think that's a really interesting one. If you were a Princeton Tiger fan and you're sitting down there saying, of all of the other 15 teams that I'd like to play, you got the matchup that you want, because they can beat Creighton, and I expect them to beat Creighton.
That'll wrap it up for that part. And I want to wrap it up for the show as well, because fastest hour of the week.
We'll hold off some of the coaching discussions till next week because they'll still be there. Rick Pitino obviously is a huge one going to St. John's. Micah Shrewsbury moving from Penn State over to Notre Dame is a big one. Notre Dame has now grabbed their coach, but Penn State will not have to get one. That's why we call it a carousel. And we'll talk about some of the hiring, and we'll actually assign grades to the athletic directors and how well they did in their hiring. And so we'll look at that as well. Also, next week, I want to take a look at the NBA. It's heating up a little bit. We've obviously had some discussion, big blow up with Kendrick Perkins and JJ Redick over who is the MVP candidate and the selection surrounding that and there within. I think that's a great discussion to have. I thought that it got a little acrimonious with the two gentlemen that they had, but I think we'll be able to have a discussion around that as to who's going to win the MVP this year, who's really playing well in the NBA, and then let's get ready for the draft. So, Pete, again, today was a difficult one. That's why we call him MVP, because I'm on the road today, and Pete took us through, and we had link after link after link, and we couldn't get it done, and finally we got it done, and I just think, I'm working with a great guy who really is a pro, and I'm not a pro, and so he makes it really easy for me. So, Pete, I wanted to thank you. We're in the zone, and next week we'll be back to you live at Westfield, and excited to be home to see how this thing fleshes out. Everybody, and remember, be kind to yourself and be kind to everybody else.